In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. These words, spoken by Theodore Roosevelt, resonated with me when I was preparing for today, and I know it does with incident responders because they always attend an incident fully wanting to do their best work. Each incident response affords us the opportunity to acknowledge better ways of doing things, or have that realised through a formal review and work at continually raising the standard for best practice. Thus, another critical component of resilience building is the practice of reflection and review. I'm very pleased to introduce you to our Maritime panel today. Emily Rundle, Media Officer, will moderate a discussion between Alex Hamilton, Senior Emergency Management Planner from the MPER unit, Amy Hare, Executive Officer, and Dean Boyer, Principal Manager, Operations South, who responded to YM efficiency in 2018 and then almost to the date, a similar incident 2 years later, that is APL England. Welcome, panel. We look forward to your conversation.
On Sunday, 24 May 2020, New South Wales Maritime was advised the container vessel, the APL England, en route from China to Melbourne, had reported the loss of 40 containers overboard and some 50 containers damaged on board in a position approximately 40 nautical miles east of Wollongong. Following the inspection of the vessel in the port of Brisbane, the number of containers lost overboard was confirmed to be more like 50, with over 70 containers damaged on board. Of the lost containers, 24 were reported as being empty and 26 contained a variety of contents. On Tuesday, the 26th of May, debris initially consisted of flexible air conditioning ducting and surgical masks was being reported on southern Sydney and Central Coast beaches. New South Wales Maritime formally activated the incident management team and Sydney Marine Incident Control Centre on Wednesday, the 27th of May, 2020. Early engagement with the vessel's insurers resulted in the appointment of a local correspondent, Oz Ship Protection and Indemnity, as their representative. This included the engagement of contract labour to undertake container and debris removal under the coordination of New South Wales Maritime. At the height of the response, up to 100 personnel were engaged on the cleanup and overall response. Contractor personnel was supplied with transport-branded high-vis vests to increase presence on the beaches. Of the 50 containers lost overboard, 15 were recovered, of which 14 were empty refrigeration containers. Notwithstanding further reported sightings, no additional containers have been recovered. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank all of the supporting agencies who work with us during this operation. These include the Port Authority of New South Wales, the Environment Protection Authority, National Parks and Wildlife Services, DPI Fisheries, the Department of Primary Industries. Now, I also would like to note that participants can write in any questions, and if there's time, we'll answer them at the end. I would also now like to introduce the panel members and their role during the incident. Dion Boyer was the alternate incident controller, Alex Hamilton was the planning officer and aerial observer, and Amy Hare was the logistics officer, finance and administration. Alex, I will now throw to you. How was the overall incident response led?
Thanks, Emily. Very early on in the piece, Shane Wild was appointed our incident controller, and within the State Marine Incident Control Centre in the SMIC, very clearly on the whiteboard, he put up his incident controller priorities. This allowed everyone who came into the Incident Control Centre to understand that we were all working towards this common set of goals, and that everything that we were doing in that room should be related to those priorities. Obviously, in any incident, safety is our highest priority, safety for the responders, safety for the general public. And then also, on top of that, we also had a whole range of COVID considerations we had to overlay into the Incident Control Centre. Additionally, These priorities then dictated what our incident action plan and our sub-plans should follow on from. We wanted to engage the public and the community and local government to make sure that they had the confidence that we knew what we were doing out in the field. And also, when we were cleaning up less debris, there was a whole waste management considerations. We also furthered that by getting the EPA to have embedded a liaison officer into our IMT. Again, volunteers picking up rubbish off the beach. It wasn't hazardous material in any of the manifest. However, volunteers need to be managed. We also wanted to engage traditional landowners for any cultural issues that may be apparent, and also work on the termination plan from the start so we know what our exit strategy is going to be. We also had the wider strategic priorities of the termination plan, risk assessment. We used the PEST LEO model for the risk assessment. That's a whole another 20-minute discussion in itself, so I won't go into that, but risk assessment dictated a lot of our activities. Tracking the containers. Obviously, there was reports of containers scattered all the way from the Central Coast down to Wollongong, and we wanted to identify where those were and how we went about tracking those, and also for risks to navigation, etc. Again, volunteers and cost recovery. Again, with any marine pollution response, cost recovery is very important. We want to be able to recoup our costs from the insurer. And then future resource planning. Again, we wanted to make sure that we had the right people in the right roles and continued, because we knew we weren't in it for the short time, we were there for the long haul to make sure it was done correctly.
Thanks, Alex. And you also mentioned it was 2 years to the day since the YM efficiency event as well, which was another major incident that you worked on. Did you also want to touch on that one, or?
Yeah, sure. So obviously it was almost 2 years to the day for the YM efficiency. We had a great, that was another big job in terms, I think the volumes of waste were much larger, but the area of impact was smaller. So what happens is, like we were seeing a lot more scattered debris, but over a larger area. But what I think one of the key learnings for the YM efficiency was that we had our MIM system in place, which I'll talk about later when we're talking about common operating pictures. But it allows us to utilise that to give it, a better situational and awareness. And a lot of the lessons learned that we got from the YM efficiency, we were able to implement into the response here.
Great, thank you very much. Now, can you touch on the fact that the incident occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic? How did the pandemic affect the outcomes of the response?
Yep. Okay, so as we said, it was during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this was at a period, if you think back, I know 2020 has been a bit of a blur for a lot of us, but if you think back to earlier in that period, May, June, it was we were coming off the first series of lockdowns. People, were coming off the first wave. So it's sort of the crisis in Victoria hadn't quite got to its highest point yet. So, but what we still wanted to do is we still wanted to have our COVID consideration. So we appointed a safety officer, Rory Hart, from our workplace health and safety team. We established, some protocols of how we would manage COVID. We had a sign-on. Later on, we got a sign-on sheet for anyone coming into the incident control centre. We had health declarations, so anyone who was coming in basically had to say they had a COVID declaration, hadn't been travelling overseas 14 days and the like. We did actually, some of the lessons learnt, I guess, afterwards were, we could have done temperature checks. We should have had a little bit tighter security within the incident control centre. But I think the fact that people had adapted to this working from home, working remotely, Microsoft Teams allowed us that we could still communicate with everyone. Some people who were in the incident control centre, myself included, were able to work from home, which made it, we could just dial in, keep everyone updated and do our briefings as well. So that was a big thing. We did have one person who did have to go and get a COVID test, and they were very good in that they, declared it, they took themselves out and they went and got a COVID test. And I think future incidents, the use of QR codes and the like that we've seen become pretty common today could be explored. And one other issue that was around was the hotel accommodation, and some of the people who travelled to come to the incident control centre were inadvertently put up in COVID hotels for return quarantine travellers, which was less than ideal. So I guess being aware of that and mitigating that earlier would help.
And how important is it to provide a common operating picture, and how did planning provide this?
So the common operating picture, I think, it's about maintaining situational awareness within the incident management team. So it's allowing, planning to talk to the ops, the incident control to know what's happening. If there's any issues from the logistics and the supply chains or finance and admin, everyone needs to be having that common operating picture. The use of MIMS, I think, was critical in that we could send out our sit reps. Any relevant key information could be stored. You didn't need to be in the room. You could log in, look at MIMS, see what the current information was, and allow for that. Everything from our aerial observer reports to all of our cost recovery and finance and admin information was all stored in there. Very quickly getting planning and operations to sit next to each other in the incident control centre meant that planning knew what operations was doing, operations knew what planning was doing, and vice versa, and that's crucial in an incident management team. I also sat in all the ops briefings so that, from a situational and intelligence side of planning, anything that had happened, you could brief the ops teams on, and anything that's happening in the field from the ops, they could brief planning what's happening, so if something wasn't working from that sort of thing. The use of aerial surveillance was key in this, and it allowed us to work out where the containers were. We could direct tugs to go and remove the containers. We had that real-time information, and then we could feed that straight into the incident management team and let the incident controller, media and our comms team know exactly what was going on.
Excellent, thank you very much. Now, Dion, I'm going to throw to you. Some IMT positions were sourced from members of the state response team. How did the change of personnel affect the outcome of the incident? And as the incoming IC, what were your initial observations? What did you change? Did you want to pop up here? Oh.
Thanks, Emily and Alex. Yeah, so as you said, when I inherited the role, things were functioning quite well in the IMT from a perspective of planning, incident action plans in place and the like. So it really come down to managing the people that were in that IMT. The incident had been going on for around 10 days. It was obvious that a bit of fatigue was setting in from those people that had been there initially. And look, people do like to own these things and hold the incidents. They hold a lot of knowledge. But I think one of the hallmarks of a good IMT and the members within it is that they can transfer the responsibility in those roles to the people coming in. So as you touched on, we did have people from a variety of other agencies, and aside from the usual IT issues that we have with people with emails and logins and the like, there is that transfer of knowledge of what's happening in the incident between members. So as a team, we were cautious about not exchanging too many roles at any one time. So succession planning was a key focus early on in the piece, as well as just looking at the structure of how the workflow was occurring throughout the day, and just trying to pick up a little bit more time to allow people to think a little bit and create a bit of headspace. So yeah, in looking, and obviously New South Wales Maritime, relatively small agency, and just on that succession planning piece, it's important that we do engage with other agencies, not only for that support to help us manage a long-term incident, but also to share the knowledge and the skills and experience that other agencies bring to us. So we did have that nice mix in the IMT of New South Wales Maritime internal staff, Port Authority, EPA. And again, just on that succession planning piece, it was important that there was enough members within that team that did have access to our internal systems, particularly in that finance space and around MIMS and the like. So it's something that we have noted down the track, is there something we can do around that IT piece to keep things going. So a point that rings out for me is that resilience, the word resilience and endurance. And if you let those two pieces down, I think the continuity of an IMT, can be at risk. So yeah, just that succession planning, that was my key focus. Yeah. So another point that we did sort of ramp up a little bit when I got into the role was around that media piece and what other agencies were doing in terms of communicating to stakeholders. So we had the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, as well as a number of environmental agencies and councils. And from there, our own internal media people, due to the wide spread of this incident, and just people wanting to know how they could report sighting of debris, which would allow us to respond. The media team did play a crucial role in that. and was an element that I also lent on fairly heavily in the first couple of days.
Emily, are you able to provide us with some media stats from the incident?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dion and Amy, for your updates there. Well, look, the media actually did play a vital role in keeping the community informed during the APL salvage incident. I think it also worked as a vehicle to promote New South Wales Maritime statewide as a proactive, hard-working agency working with supportive agencies to get the job done. I remember seeing the police alert come through on the Sunday, the 24th of May, saying the vessel had lost the containers near Wollongong. However, the incident didn't really become ours until the contents or the containers themselves started to wash ashore. Then on the Tuesday afternoon, we started to receive media reports of face masks on Bondi Beach. We were mostly all working from home due to the pandemic, but I thought I should pack up my things and head into the office as this was going to be big. By the Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, the media attention had started and it was intense. I think I received more than 40 plus phone calls per day from television, print, online, radio, asking for updates, interviews, visions, stills, anything that we could give them. At one point, I was juggling 2 phones, my emails and texts all at once. Media contacted us, as Dion said. Either they contacted us or we contacted them directly from the South Coast all the way up to Newcastle due to the spread of the debris. I'll never forget one of the media greats, Robert Obadia from Channel 7, huffing and puffing as he made his way over steep sand dunes on the Central Coast, letting us know that they were going to be filming the 5 refrigerator containers that had washed up on the beach and that there was an excavator there that had just arrived to remove it all. Styrofoam was everywhere. Over the next between 4 and 6 weeks, we worked with a range of media, including the ABC, Channel 7, Channel 9, 2GB, Triple M, and local newspapers up and down the coast. We arranged for Channel 7 to come to Rozelle and speak to Alex Burrell, who was the acting executive director at the time, and see inside the SMIC to understand what actually happens on a daily basis during a salvage operation or crisis incident. When we started to tow the containers into shore, we also arranged for the media to film it to showcase what New South Wales Maritime was doing and how we were working with supporting agencies to ensure the salvage operation was managed well, safely, and with minimal impacts to the environment. When you're in the SMIC, time just flies. You're in a vortex and the media inquiries are like a tsunami. It really is important to work quickly and get back to every single journalist, but also ensure the information you're putting out there is factually correct. Every single time we had a media inquiry or interview request, I checked with the guys first as to what the most up-to-date information was. Then I would take that information and tee up with media an interview, a vision package, whatever it was that they needed that we could supply within the appropriate timeframes. We also kept the Minister's office across most inquiries and did weekly media reports with a review of what happened that week. The biggest thing we did, which was successful from a media perspective, was working incredibly closely with the team. This included Alex Burrell, Alex Hamilton, Shane Wild, Adam Milgate, all the supporting agencies and the BSOs. It was a massive team effort. It was also really important to have a share of voice and a variety of trained spokespeople. Sometimes Alex Burrell might have been in a meeting or dealing with an aspect of the salvage, and so I would work with Alex Hamilton, Shane, Hendrik, Chris. Sharing the load really helped the media have a fresh voice and be able to create a different angle. It was also important to split the work, as one person cannot do it all. While I was in the SMIC, my colleague Penny Robbins was working from her home due to the pandemic, so she worked on the daily media releases, important written responses and updates to the Minister's office while I was proactively dealing with the media on the phone. The incident attracted some incredible media attention for the 4 to 6 weeks, so the key period right as the incident happened and then a few weeks afterwards. This included 1,338 online articles, 11 print articles, and 161 broadcast pieces of coverage. I think we're now going to hand over to Amy regarding the cost recovery, which is the responsibility of the finance and administrative role. Amy, can you talk us through the process, please, about what is involved?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Emily. So cost recovery, it's a huge task. As briefly mentioned, we did learn a lot of lessons from lime efficiency. Therefore, we were able to implement a lot of processes for APL England well in advance. And I do think that because we did implement those processes in place, that we did have a successful cost recovery. So cost recovery starts well before the incident occurs and continues long after the incident finishes. So it's a huge role. It's crucial, as I mentioned, to have the right processes in place. So this includes having a master spend tracking spreadsheet, timesheets and expense sheets, etc., all ready to go. So success is about having the right people around you, ensuring that we have correct trained personnel. So we were lucky to call on our SRT members, so Selena Jenkins and Joanne Smith from the Port Authority, very early on came in and essentially hit the ground running. I think at the peak of the incident, we were collating in excess of 80 timesheets per week, in addition to all of the expenses, the receipts, collating all of that information within the first couple of weeks. Now, as the scale of the incident does, as the incident does scale up, it's really important to have dedicated resources. As mentioned, a lesson learned from YM efficiency was that we do need to have someone sitting in that hot seat as a dedicated resource. That makes sure that they can dedicate their time solely to the functions of finance and admin and concentrate on that paperwork. Otherwise, the workload just gets too overwhelming. Now, cost recovery involves capturing real-time data. So this, by actually having that dedicated resource sitting in that hot seat, at the daily briefings, we're able to give an indication of how many Ks our vehicles, BSOs, have travelled, and in turn, that's a really good statistic that we can then pass on to the media unit. So ensuring that our information is up to date, it informs the incident controller and also provides some good news stories for the media. So where are we at now? So we've just collated all of the expenses relating to our supporting agencies. So they will be finalised within the last couple of weeks. And now it's our responsibility to bundle everything up and send it off to the insurer. Now, if we go off YM efficiency, there was a document folder, you know, so thick. I do think that APL England will definitely be up there, but I'm really proud to say that with the support of our SRT members, in particular Joe and Selena, we are ready to submit our claim to the insurer. So that will come through this financial year. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Amy, that's great. I just have one final question for the last 2 minutes just to the panel. What are the main lessons you learned from the incident, and how is the state now in a better position to respond to future incidents?
Thanks, Emily. Noting that Shane's already covered a lot of this in his previous discussion around the after action review, the areas for improvement that I think we discussed were earlier engagement with workplace health and safety, including some of the contractual arrangements around contractors and safe work practices, and getting the documentation from the contractors earlier in the piece. Rostering, including what our business as usual considerations are, and also further mentoring of people within the IMT. One of the key positives I found in the incident was how, you know, the value of training, the value of exercises, and the value of the State Response Team workshop, that we could call upon people from various agencies to come in, fulfil a role, you had that relationship with them, and you could work with them, and you could give them a task knowing full well and confident that that task would be done at a high level within timeframes in a high pressure environment. Another area for improvement would be, I guess, we had very good early on engagement with the local government at that general manager level, but also sometimes that didn't filter down to the regional emergency management officer, the REMO level. So I guess engaging the REMOs straight off the bat to let them know, given that it was several REMO environment areas along the New South Wales coast, to get that engagement earlier so that they could then touch base with their network to allow them to know that this situation was under control in New South Wales Maritime and the supporting agencies had it under control. Dion or Amy, is there anything that you think lessons learned or areas for improvement you'd like to add on?
No, I think Alex has covered it well. One point is really just to expect the unexpected, and that situations can evolve. For example, in this situation, it's quite unusual that the insurer led the shoreline cleanup response in engaging contractors, which is probably a departure from business as usual. So I think when we do these scenarios and role plays and the like, and just think about what can and can't go wrong, that yeah, some of those things are a bit of a curveball. You don't expect that to be the case, and accordingly that adjusts how we operate in the field, what our level of jurisdiction is in the field and our responsibilities, and also to what scale an IMT would stand up. Otherwise, thanks, Alex. Well covered. Ames?
No, that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel, for such an interesting conversation and for demonstrating the seriousness of applying lessons learned and always seeking excellence. All you participants, hope you have your glasses, water, tea, coffee refreshed, because I'm really excited to introduce our first guest speaker for our workshop. It seems that in 2020, we have a whole new vocabulary of words. Words that were hardly used have taken on new meaning and will perhaps become mainstays. Words like Blur's Day, Google Classroom, JobKeeper, Quarantini, ISO, Rona, face masks, and mute. Perhaps the most used word. You're on mute. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Take yourself off mute. Well, where is most of this language found? You guessed it, we probably learned it from social media. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, WeChat is littered with these words. Well, love it or hate it, social media is here to stay. These words and stories that we find can be very powerful tools. The public, our communities are linked to it. So let's see how we can get better at using these tools when it comes to marine pollution and emergency response. Kieran Zerner is a keynote speaker, masterclass presenter, and author of The Standout Effect. With over 15 years of experience in marketing communications, strategy, and organizational culture, working with businesses both large and small, Kieran holds a Bachelor of Management, a Master's of Management, and is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Drawing on her deep industry experience, today Kieran will speak to us on the subject, connecting with communities using social media. We will be inviting a Q&A chat toward the end of her presentation, so please start sending across any of your questions. Kieran, over to you. We're listening with rapt attention.
Well, thank you very much, Rosa, and to all of the team. It's so great to be here today. And I was listening into that panel discussion before, and I just love to hear the interagency cooperation for something so significant. So I'm really looking forward to exploring this topic. How do we connect with communities using social media? Now, I don't know about you, but I remember the days when a snap was a card game and the post was actually something you received in the mail. Do you agree? You remember those days? And now, of course, just as Rosa said, that social media has become so pervasive globally. Now, if you look at the whole entire global population, at least over half of those have access to the internet, and almost half of the global population have a social media account. Just think about that. You think about, not everyone has access to running water, and yet everyone, almost half of the global population has a social media account. So what that means is that literally we are entering an age of global connection like never before. And I love a quote, paraphrase from that book, Homo Deus, which is the future of tomorrow. And it says that we are a global audience connected by a digital message, just like a whisper, what once we only thought possible by the gods. It's pretty phenomenal, isn't it? And not only is it global, it's also personal. That means that social media, digital, has literally become threaded to the patterns and behaviours of our lives. It's changed the way we live, it's changed the way we work, it's also changed the way we love. Who's swiping right for that date on Saturday night? But not only is it that broadcast message, it's not just all about one way, and I think that's the thing that significantly changed. It's also this incredible tool for listening. And that means that big brands have the ability to listen to their audience like never before. It means that organisations and governments have the opportunity to listen to their communities like never before. And it also means that for senior leaders, you're able to listen to what the current issues are with your people in this time. And at the same time, it's almost like we can't live without it. I just love that. Instagram is down, just describe your lunch to me. You know, what would we do if we were documenting every moment of our lives? If you've got young people, perhaps you can relate. Or I quite like this one, Instagram, when old people and technology collide. Delete cookies, but I just baked them. I love that one. Well, in fact, the latest data suggests that the plus 70 age demographic is actually the fastest growing on social media. So just get your head around that. And of course, as you've already discussed today, that COVID has hit, borders have closed, businesses have shut. And what has happened is that where we used to rely on face-to-face, we used to rely on foot traffic, you know, to actually seeing people, there has been an even greater shift to the online environment than ever before. So for businesses, for leaders, and also for organisations, we've all had to adapt to this online space. Like even the fact that we're doing this conference over online instead of face-to-face like we were planning. So today, this is the topic that Rosa and I, we've had some wonderful discussions about this, about how do we connect with communities using social media. And I hope that whatever your role, whatever your team, that there is something that you'll be able to draw out of this, and that you will actually be able to help people like Emily in their job as media and social media liaison within the department. So one of the things we're going to talk about is this HEY principle. Now, what is it? We're going to get into that as we get into the discussion. But I just want to give that sort of background of what it is that I am so passionate about. Like, I truly am passionate about helping leaders, helping business owners, and also helping teams and large organizations. How do you understand the complexities and almost mysteries of this online environment and these online tools, and use those to further stand out and to get attention, to get known, and then to grow your influence, wherever that is, whether that's in your community, for your business, or for your life. And I explore these topics usually around the country, but more often than not, it's here in the studio. Whether it's digital storytelling, so if you've got a large team, how do you connect people through stories? Whether it's about building your online brand, that digital first impression. Whether it's even about, you know, how do you communicate and connect within in communities more effectively. And so all of this has been summed up into a manual, which I published last year, which is the Standout Effect. So that's a guide which helps people. So back to you guys. I'm curious to know, now, I would love you to be thinking about what questions you have during this presentation. But I also want you to be thinking right now, like, how could this concept, these online tools, be helpful for you and your team right now? How could social media be useful for you and your team right now? So what we're going to explore for the remaining moments of this session is looking at that HEY principle. So, of course, it's an acronym. The H is for how do we use social media to hear? So how do we use it as a listening tool? And we're going to explore that during this session. The E is for engagement. So how do you use social media, not just to hear, but also to engage with local communities and with even within your team? And the Y is about your story. So how do we enable, empower all of these mini brand ambassadors, whatever it is that you're doing, to be able to tell the story so that you could be enabling your social media team, your media liaisons to further get your message out and the good work that you are doing. So let's start with the first one about the hearing. Now, I found that fascinating, listening to that panel discussion about the incredible work that your team did during the APL England incident. Now, I'm curious to know from your side, you all have heard how hard the media team worked. Wow, what was that, like 1,800 articles printed on it? Well, I'm curious to know, where do you listen during that incident? What were you scanning for? What were you listening for to get information which would be helpful for your team? Were you listening to the media? Were you looking at social media? I just want to invite you now to start thinking about where it was that you personally were listening during this incident. Now, why is that useful? Think about why it would be useful from your point of view and for your operation within your team. Now, certainly, absolutely, and this was said by one of your colleagues, it's about intelligence gathering. So when you're able to hear about something landing in Bondi or Port Stephens or down south in Wollongong, be able to understand what was happening, where it was happening, who it was impacting, and how that could affect the local communities and how you could respond. But not just that aspect of intelligence gathering, it's also that chance to listen for what is the community sentiment. You know, how effectively are we responding? What are some of the concerns that maybe we wouldn't know about when we're sitting up at more of a state level? We don't know until we get down into the community. What's the community sentiment? That's a useful thing to be able to listen for. And just as Emily said before, once we're able to listen, it's that opportunity to respond and be a trusted source. So I spent a lot of time in researching this presentation looking at the Facebook page of the New South Wales Maritime, which was actually a fantastic page. I love the content on there, doing a great job. And I think even the ability to provide that real-time advice, updating your response during this incident from a trusted source was absolutely imperative during this process. But I'm going to go back to you. Where could you be listening? Now, no doubt you're scanning for in the media. So looking in news articles, you're reading, you're listening, you're hearing. And of course, no doubt you would, for some of you would be getting updates, media updates from your media liaison team. But I also wonder, is there other ways that you could go further into listening, into hearing, into interpreting and understanding? Well, one of the things that you could be doing is a Google alert. Have you ever used a Google alert, just to Google alert, that's all you do to find it, to actually look for some of those hot topics, those key words which you can be scanning for? And once you set up a Google alert, you know, to listen, you can even set up a daily digest to give you the information. Or maybe you're more interested in looking for what are some of the news sites out there? There's some phenomenal tools which also allow you to scan and to listen. One of them is called Feedly. This is probably my favorite, and it's all for free. And basically what it means, instead of you going out to all these different news sites, you just go to the one site and you're able to get the information there. So that's a good one. But also, we're talking about social media today, something like Twitter. I don't know if you open up Twitter and you get this long barrage of tweets that feel so overwhelming, and yet it's a fantastic listening tool. If you know key people, key groups, key organisations who communicate important information that would be helpful for you during an incident, you can actually set up a Twitter list where you're able to scan for specific people. So that's a fantastic tool to be listening that all of us could set ourselves up to do. And of course, the other thing is, once you know where your, say, social media channels, maybe it's a Facebook account, maybe it's LinkedIn, depending on what your department is, to be able to listen, to read the comments that people are putting in. If you want to get a sense of what that community sentiment is, go to the comments. It's a fantastic way to be able to hear firsthand. And look, I know sometimes there may be complaints, but at the same time, that it gives us a chance to hear where some of the problem areas or maybe some of the praise points that maybe we could overlook if we don't get that reinforcing response there. So that's listening. Now, I want to get into talking about the E, which is where we use social media for engagement. Now, I don't know about you. Are you one of those people who use Facebook groups? Because Facebook groups are a fantastic way to just tap straight into what that community sentiment is. Now, Facebook groups, There's about 2.5 billion people on Facebook. And just to put that in perspective, about half of the people that use Facebook are on a Facebook group. And what might surprise you is that some of the most, or maybe not, some of the most popular groups out there are things like buy, swap, sell, parenting, animals, finding employment. What do we notice? They're all general interest kind of life stuff. So when we're trying to engage with our local communities, a good tip for us to remember is we need to create connections, because remember, this is about connections with community. We need to create connections around their needs, not ours. You know, where I saw this probably best described was Atlassian was doing some pro bono work for an Indigenous organisation, and they were creating these a database of self-help, personal development, leadership tools. And they were trying to create this blog or this group to get people to engage with this content, and they had very little success. What they also did on the platform was they created a blog about footy scores on the weekend, and it was going bananas. Everyone was jumping on, talking about their favourite team and sharing and communicating about, you know, their favourite players and what the scores were. So what Atlassian pretty quickly worked out was we actually needed to go to the community needs, and from that place, relate it back to some of this leadership development, mentoring, and the other tools that we provide. And suddenly they found a much greater engagement. So what's the learning, I guess, for you guys is, well, first of all, who are those local communities that you could be engaging with? And I heard someone mention before local government. So the local government and the different groups, and I wonder there may even be someone today, that local government communities have fantastic social media activity, and no doubt have created some groups. So is there ways to find out what groups are available in your area on things like Facebook? What about surf lifesaving, if that's going to be relevant to your area if you're near a coastal region? Maybe fishing communities. It could be environmental. It could be local campsites. Or it could be an animal protection. What are the different groups that have overlap? I can almost imagine, if you were to imagine a map, and you start mapping all the circles over each other, starting to see in your local area, where are the relevant communities and how can you be engaging with them, becoming a presence, listening and hearing. And some of the tips I would suggest would be, and no doubt at this point, I think we need to make sure you check in with your media team and with your social media liaison, whoever it is. My background was I worked at Westpac for many years, but then I worked at the Department of Industry. So I've worked in a New South Wales government office. I understand the hierarchy. My background's as a comms manager. So I always want to endorse the right approach. But what we could do once, whether you get permission or whether you know who to contact, looking through the comments that come up and being with permission to respond to those comments, to give useful and correct information, the facts, which we were talking about before, but also to answer questions. If someone says, you know, I've noticed something here, what is this? To be able to respond quickly with what the actual correct information is, so it doesn't escalate or blow out into some other discussion that's not helpful, but also potentially, you know, with permission, to contribute content. So imagine if the local government or local area, the local environmental group was able to see some of the fantastic work that your different agencies were doing. Wouldn't that be a fantastic way to start spreading the community, spreading the good work that you're doing in the community, connecting with your community in a place and in a way that matters to them? I just wonder for you right now, what's coming to mind as you think about what opportunities you have, who you could be connecting with, and importantly, what the story is. So this is kind of my last point, the last section, which is the why, which is your story. So again, I just want you to be thinking about what questions that you have and jump into the Q&A box so that you can ask me those at the end. So here we want to talk about your story. Now, I loved what Emily said, that it's about looking for the facts, but also I remember that I didn't work in media, but I worked in internal comms. So I remember sitting next to the media liaison who would always say, we're looking for a case study. We're looking for a case study. I need photos. I need a story. I need to know what's happening. And so what if could you imagine if you, your team, wherever you are, geographically dispersed, were able to be the people on the ground finding and discovering those stories so that you could either share it in your internal network, whether that's Yammer or Workplace, Facebook's Workplace, or providing that to the comms team to be able to push it out more broadly. Imagine how awesome that would be. Less of the bad news, more of the good news. So why do stories work? I don't know. Let's tell a story. Imagine that we're in a drought situation, which we were just late last year. So what I could, and probably still are, that goes to show what I do or don't know about the state, you know more than me. So let's say we're in a drought situation. I could respond to you as a community. I could go out to my community and try to get some action or to ask them to follow along with the work that we were doing. And I could give them facts and figures. I could talk about climate. I could talk about, water salinity. I could talk about, fish levels. I did a bit of work last year with the Department of Industry, the water. So I'm all up with all the stats and facts and figures. Or I could tell them a story like this one. This is Phil. Phil is the publican of the Tilpa pub. Now, Tilpa, some of you may know, is a small town in regional New South Wales. Now, it has a school, it has a community hall, and it has a pub. There's only 6 people in Tilpa on the last census night. There's actually 5, but there was a backpacker that was staying over at the pub. Now, you look at this photo, and there are so many, you may not be able to see the detail of it, but there's so many names that are written up on the wall. These are the names of people who travel from regions all around that space to come together, to be the community, to ease the pain or the joy of whatever it is that they're going through at that time. And I understand there's even Ivan Milat's name somewhere up on that wall. So it's certainly a place with a lot of stories. Now, Phil gets this call a lot of times from Melbourne or from local cities, from Sydney, or people in the broader region who say, can I come to the pub? Can I bring my boat? Can I go fishing on the river? And he has to say, no, there's no water in the river. And if you can see all the way at the top here, this is where his jetty comes out, and there's no water. And it has a significant impact, not only on his business, on the community, and on the whole region. Now, this story was one of the stories that was told in the Great River Run, which was a Daily Telegraph special. I tell you about the Telegraph just because my husband is a photographer for the Telegraph. And he went with 2 other journos, and they went to the very top of the northern New South Wales, where Murray-Darling begins in our border, in our state, and goes all the way down to the south. And along the way, they found the stories of the people, of the businesses, of the places, to tell the story through lots of different ways. So they would look at, using a drone, thinking about photos, doing interviews with people who lived there, and actually hearing on the ground of what was happening, and then to bring that story out to the public. Now, why do stories work? Why do you think stories work? Why did this series of articles actually have an incredible effect on the work that was done in this regional area? Not long after, there was some local grants that were paid into the area to support these communities. Why does it work? I think in some ways it's because stories literally captivate our attention. It's like you think about when you go to a movie, we sit glued for an hour and a half watching this movie. Some of us can't sit for an hour and a half at our desk without getting up and getting agitated. But also, they're easy to remember. Stories will stick while facts may be forgotten. And it's because of the science behind it. It's the images, it's the words, and it's the emotion. And all of those go together to make it more memorable. Like you just think about when you sit through a presentation, you might the facts go over your head, but it's the stories you remember. It was like when, again, I'm sorry, I'm using you as an example a lot, Emily, but when Emily told that story of, I was sitting at home, I packed up, I went into the office, I was taking phone calls, every phone was ringing. We all leaned in, we were there with that story. I remember that, whereas if she just told us the facts, I might have forgotten it. And it also builds trust. This is just going back to that, the art of who we are as humans. We build rapport through telling stories. So your stories are so vitally important. Now let's look at a way that you could use digital storytelling as we wrap up. And I hope you've got a few of your questions ready. I think it's this, that you could be the eyes and ears on the ground for your comms team. You could be the eyes and the ears on the ground for your internal network to be able to share within your team. And I think a great story has two parts. One is the message, so what it's about, and the other one is the method, so how you tell it. So you think about what's the message. This is the facts. These are all the who, what, why, when, where. These are the different angles. It's the fresh voice that you guys bring. So it's the message, knowing what it is. But I just want to end off by just looking at the method, just some ways that you could use creatively to tell your story. One of them is definitely the photos that you take. So when you're out and about and you have at your fingertips a mobile phone, which in some ways is better than the digital cameras we used to use like a year ago, a couple of years ago. So you've got your phones with you, ready and with you to take and capture these moments. And you think about what's the difference between a good photo and, by comparison, the blurry one. So it's just maybe just a call to attention to think about how you're capturing those moments. So look for the good moments to be able to tell that story. And the final one I just want to touch on, and I run full one-day, half-day workshops on these, but I think part of it is remembering, again, with that mobile phone, there is so much you can do with your mobile phone in capturing and telling the story in short little sound bites. And you just got to remember a few things. Just want to leave with you. Remember sound. So if you can look at investing in a little microphone, they're pretty cheap when you get them from some of the local camera stores, or maybe distributing some out to your team. But good light, so looking for ways you can use on natural light or making sure that you can capture the moment well. But also, avoid the wobbles. No one loves it when you're sitting there and you've got the wobbles going on from a wobbly selfie stick. So just try and remember what you can control to capture the moment well. And there's some fantastic apps out there, which I'll just show you super quick. There's this app called Magisto, where it's incredible, where you can actually use the photos just from your phone, and it also works online. So you just pick your photos, and then what it does is you pick an editing style. So if you're like, I'm not an editing person, I don't know how to do it, you can just pick a style, and there's already commercially licensed music in there. And it's incredible how you can create these little short videos very, very easily. And it's free, and there's also, of course, it goes up to $100, but I've been using one for $9. And if you've got information, so maybe you've got like some documents or some detailed information that you want to turn into a video, even something like Content Samurai, which is free, where what it does is you create a new video. So for if you've got something important to share, so you create a new video, you copy in your words, you take out the words, you create the slides. What it does is it will help you choose images, or you can put them together yourself. And then right down the bottom, it will select it all together using artificial intelligence to create this video. And you can even add a voice track, logos, all the rest. So it's pretty cool. There's lots of things that you can do really easily to become a storyteller. So just as you're getting ready for your questions, we're about to hand over to questions. I just want to ask you, because I believe none of us want to sit here and just learn. It's always about how can we take action. So out of today, I want you to grab your pen and paper and to write down what is one thing out of what I've shared with you today that you can put into practice. Whether it's, just looking for setting up a tool to listen, and the H, how can you hear your local community? Maybe it's the E, looking to engage. Maybe even having a team meeting with some key people to look at how are we engaging with local communities, which is, a bit of a stakeholder mapping exercise, no doubt you're already doing. And the Y is about your voice. How could you become storytellers out and about? And this content can be used in so many different ways. So I just want to encourage you to write down what that one thing is that you could be telling for that story. So jump on over if there's any questions. Do we have any questions or any that you guys want to ask me over to the team?
Thank you, Kieran. We do have a couple of questions for you. So we might just start with this first one. What do you see as the biggest pitfall in using social media from a government perspective?
Yes, good question. I think one of the biggest pitfalls from a government perspective is the layer of control that we need to have, because social media by its very nature is fluid, it's on time, it's real life, it's live. And so when we have to wait to get something checked off and signed off, sometimes the moment has passed. And look, I understand that. I understand that at the same time, we need to make sure that we have the right messaging, we're using the right words, we're factually correct, it needs to be signed off. So I understand that that is important. At the same time, though, how do we build in some ways that we can be nimble and quick? And whether that's as simple as, maybe each team has someone who does still scan, say, the Facebook page and sees a comment. And maybe they would be able to notify or to create a system to say, how can we respond to this and get onto it quickly? So looking for ways within the safety net that you can respond quickly. And so one of the things that I have often suggested working in the government department is using your internal channels. So you can be really prolific at using your internal channels, whether that's Yammer, whether that's Workplace, so that you are sharing the stories as you go. That's brilliant for, if you think about you've got a geographically dispersed team, to be able to share those stories actually makes the invisible feel visible and we all feel more connected. So if we can use the internal channels, which are safe and approved, and we feel free with those, then we know that media or social media or whoever it is, your senior leaders can watch those and tap into that for content. So I think it's just working out how we can navigate that process.
That's helpful. Thank you, Kieran. Another question that's come through from the chat is, what is the best strategy to respond to fake news on social media during a response?
That's a good question. And no doubt, like me, you've watched shows like The Great Hack, The Social Dilemma. I actually thought The Great Hack was a little bit better. So if you haven't watched that one, check that out on Netflix. And the reality is that in this world we live in, that there is the ability to influence us with a lot of information that we can't always control. And so knowing that, I think, and look, I'll be honest with you, I must say, a lot of what I do is I help people how to use these tools. And I was like, oh, this is so awful, I don't want to do it anymore. But then upon reflecting, I'm like, okay, well, there's two sides to this stick. There's a good side and a positive side, and there's a way that this can influence, it connects, and it allows us to use the tools in a helpful way. On the other side, we also need to be responsible with it, to look for the sources of where the information comes from, and also almost to take that step back and to always use a questioning mind. So that would be my tip there. So with fake news, usually it comes from a source that is not a correct place. Like it comes from, it's a made up account. So what we want to be looking for is asking the question, is this real? Is it, where does it come from? And then to go to the source. So who are that's why I talk about hearing, where is your trusted source? So is it like a news source like ABC or Sydney Morning Herald or the Telegraph or New York Times? What's your trusted source? And look to go there for the information, and then always use that questioning mind. Is that right? Is that correct? Do I agree with this? To be able to protect it. It's a bit like driving a car, I guess. It can get you somewhere or it can kill you. So how do we use the vehicle that we have responsibly? That would be my answer.
Great tips, an inquiring mind, and check that source of truth. Thanks, Kieran. We might just go over to one more while we have you. How could the response to an incident like APL England be improved in the future from a media perspective?
Well, to fully answer that problem, I would have to see everything that had gone on. And my experience and exposure has only been listening to the interview and a few short articles. But let's just take, and it sounds like, by all accounts, that you guys did a fantastic job. I think that let's just take any incident as it occurs. What are the important things when an incident occurs? It's definitely that being able to have that first response. So the first assessment, what is it? Who's impacted? What are the issues? Who is this going to affect? Who else needs to be in the room to make decisions? And that sounds like that was what you did immediately to respond to that. Then the next thing, and this is really drawing on all my 15 years of corporate comms experience. And the next thing is, well, what are the agreed messages? So what do we need to say? What's okay? What's not okay? And then how do we get that message out to the people who need to communicate it? So exactly as Emily said, getting in the key spokespeople to make sure they're informed, that they're out in front of the media, that they're putting the positive or the factual information out there. And then also looking at your employees, so all of you who are out there on the ground, making sure you're also informed so that you can respond to questions as they come, whether that's through social channels, whether that's through face-to-face, what you're hearing. But it's also the loop, and this is where social is great, so the loop back. So what are you hearing from the ground so that the media team and the senior leadership can also respond? And so that's where I think your internal channels are so vital. So what are you hearing? What's information? Do you have that loop back so that you can also, and then respond again? I think where we've seen things go wrong is when either it has not been factually correct, it's either potentially fabricated or avoiding the truth. There's been a slow response time, or there hasn't been that ability to get the information out to the people who need to know and then back. So that would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you. So essentially looking at those main points by revisiting our media strategy or plan. That's great. Well, Kieran, we really want to thank you for joining us at our special event this year. You've certainly given us some food for thought and some creative ideas on social media tools. Thank you from all of us once again.
Oh, pleasure. And I hope
you participants for joining us in the second part of our session today. We would like to take a break now. Perhaps you're ready to have your lunch. If you could please join us back at midday at 12 p.m. Sydney time today, and we will conclude with our guest speaker and some final feedback. Thank you and see you shortly.